You're listening to the Surgeons of Horror podcast.
Hello and welcome to the Surgeons of Horror podcast. As you can probably tell, this voice is a bit different to what you're normally used to. You probably could tell from the introduction that's a little bit different to what you're used to, but I'm actually the lead surgeon today. I am Anthony the Big Cheese Yee. You're getting a different sort of Surgeons podcast, a bit more energy, a bit more vibe, a bit more coolness, because quite frankly, Soul Day, shit, really. Let's face it. So none of that shit, none of that soul shit. It's just going to be me with a whole bunch of awesomeness and a really awesome guest surgeon who is Soul Murte. Hello, Saul.
Yeah, awkward.
totally awkward. I literally didn't know who the guest surgeon was.
Guess this, didn't you?
Yeah, I did. I did. Nah, you know I'm only joking. I'm loving you because everybody loves you because this podcast is kicking ass now. It's kicking goals.
We're getting a good solid following, which is good. It's good, you know. And we take it very easy. People know the formula nowadays. Most of the time, it's like we pick a classic movie and we dissect and discuss that bitch as much as we can. But obviously, this one's a different beast. Hence why I have to bow to somebody with a greater skill set in this particular domain, which is why you've stepped into the fray and our lead surgeon today. So, what have you got? For Cheese? What's happening?
Well, we're trying something. Firstly, we're trying something that when you first hit me with the idea of I want to do a podcast about horror films, one of the first things we brought up is we have to do The Thing, because it's one of the first films we bonded over.
Yep.
And then I led the podcast on that, and that was a disaster. I gotta say, I was shit on that one. But the other thing I was like, oh, you're gonna do found footage films, right? Because you came up with the idea of a podcast in the mid-noughties. No, not mid-noughties, but early tens, teens.
Yeah,
by that stage,
we started off with the accidental stuff early on, so and that was about maybe 2011, something like that.
Yeah, so mid-tens.
And then we kind of went, that kind of works. Let's open up that umbrella a bit. Let's talk about horror as a bigger subject, which obviously leads itself to, as you said, found footage being one of the big subgenres of that genre.
Well, found footage was like the genre, the new horror thing of the 21st century, really.
Yeah.
And so we were like, we got to do one on found footage, and you're like, no. No, that's not true. You were like, I want to do a whole heap of things first, but now, so you have done that, and we're now finally here, and we're doing a podcast that's slightly different. We're not talking about any one film. We're talking about a bunch of films that fit this genre. So just a brief background for people out there about found footage who probably know what found footage is, but may not know necessarily about found footage. I.e., I'm about to read some stuff I got off Wikipedia.
What?
Basically, found footage. Wait, did you hear something?
No.
Did you hear that?
No.
Okay, never mind. Found footage is stuff that's meant to be used in docos, I guess. It's like a piece of material that's supposed to be authentic, and it was originally used in docos, but it's also been used in literature. Like a lot of books have aspects of somebody's diary in there, or a report on something.
Dracula.
Yeah, so it's a literary device. So it's been around for ages. But in terms of found footage films, I found one from 1961 called The Connection, which apparently was the first use of found footage, which predates Cannibal Holocaust, which I'm guessing you would say, and most people would say, was the first found footage film ever. Is that right? What do you think?
Yeah, and we've just done a podcast of that as well, so you can go back and listen to that one.
There you go.
Want to, and Mr. Lovegrove and I went through that one because it celebrated 40 years this year. For us, it was a big one. It was a big one because it was it was very experimental at the time in more ways than one. And what you see is pretty much what you get. And so much so that people, in particular, when it first screened in Italy, got slammed with the video nasty straight away, and the director got hauled up in front of the Italian courts to try and prove to them that he didn't actually kill 4 people.
Yeah, right.
So it was a big thing. They actually did kill animals in it. And that kind of remade the whole kind of review of animal cruelty and rules that are surrounded that. area had to come into play because of what was filmed on screen for Cannibal Holocaust, essentially. So yeah, lots of big things. So for me, yes, that's the granddaddy of found footage films.
There you go. And today, in the 21st century, it's a whole subgenre of filmmaking. It can be used in science fiction, like Europa Report, which is probably a good example for me. Chronicle is another good example of a sci-fi found footage film. You got drama, which is 0 Day. You got comedy. Spinal Tap would qualify as found footage, wouldn't it? For comedy.
I want to say that's more mockumentary.
Mockumentary? Yeah.
I don't know if that's. I wouldn't say that's found footage.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. There you go.
Definitely.
Oh, what about and you also have Kids, which Echo to Earth is probably another good example of that. Well, that's kind of sci-fi as well. But in this day and age, it's mostly associated with horror. And do you know why that is, Saul?
Mainly because of Paranormal Activity.
Yeah, I was going to go Blair Witch.
Blair Witch, yeah.
Yeah. Blair Witch is a big changer. And I think why Blair Witch kicked off and why it became the horror thing was the age of the internet. Because it was the way I remember at the time it was the way it was marketed. And it's very similar to the Cannibal Holocaust thing. Yeah. People were going, is this real?
Yep.
So this is the early days of the internet before fake news was a thing. But yeah, that's it. That people didn't know if it was real or not. And that whole just people investigating it and saying, no, it's fake, generated noise and made you go, let's go see it. And it came across as really cheap and innovative filmmaking. I agree. I think
that's the big thing. It was cheap, you know?
Yeah.
So, and people started thinking, hold on, this could be really an easy thing to make, easy to make, cheap to make, and will have return in the box office because it, obviously it was a big win.
Yeah.
I mean, like, what's it? So, like, when Blair Witch came out, it did coincide with another film at the same time, and I always forget the bloody name of it, which is annoying. Oh
yeah.
What was it? They were very, 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 very similar.
Were they?
Yeah. And it's going to bug me. There it is. The Last Broadcast is what it's called. And it's done from the point of view of an investigative reporter, kind of going into basically to investigate the mythical Jersey Devil in New Jersey.
I vaguely remember this. Yeah.
Yeah, and it kind of turns out that he kind of kills his own crew. Yeah. So it's a big kind of twist on it. But it released exactly the same time, same theme, but Blair Witch went gangbusters and this one got buried.
Why is that, do you think?
It's not very good.
Oh yeah, I think at the end of the conclusion at the end of today, I have a few things I want to bring up about found footage. What makes a good found footage film and what doesn't. But at the end of the day, you could probably sum up with the words is, if it's good, it's good. It's not, it's not.
Yeah.
And that's with anything, really. But, yeah, I think that was the big change. I think that was the big game changer for me, was that the marketing side of it made people go, is it real? Is it not?
The thing with Blair Witch, too, which, and to tap back into what you were saying about the internet, too, like we've done a whole podcast on the Blair Witch franchise, so go check that out, too. So we're not going to go into too much detail on it. Other than what I want to make a point of saying is that they did so much back history, and this comes back to character development and plot development, which we are huge fans of. And there's so much there that there was pages on the website dedicated to it. So that led to people kind of going, "Wait, hold on a minute, is this real?" And then because the internet was in its infancy, there's a whole page on it. It's got to be real.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
So yeah, it was very clever marketing on that respect.
Yeah, and and you could do a whole podcast on the internet basically about fake news and the era, and how we now live in the era of fake news and misinformation. Yeah, and that was it. People had whole web pages dedicated to it, and it also led to a market. There were like films around that era, like the early 10s. You have to have a film. You have a strong website presence. You need to have web films coming out beforehand, feeding it. And some films still do that. But that was, I mean, you did a course based on transmedia, I think it was called at the time, transmedia.
Yeah, multi-platform transmedia. Yeah, there's many names banded around it. But, like for me, this isn't in the realms of found footage, but when Prometheus first came out and the lead up to that, there was some really kind of clever stuff.
Yeah.
In the whole David kind of short stories, who is David, and the building of David and stuff. And what was the other one? The J.J. Abrams one that kind of had the kind of mystery kind of background to it. What the hell was that?
Cloverfield?
It could have been Cloverfield. It may have been Cloverfield. Yes, I think it was. I think it was Cloverfield because there was like these Japanese websites that were made into the scientific laboratories and stuff. So it was hinting that there was these things under the ground and things like that.
Yeah, being found.
Yeah, so it was. It was very you'd stumble across this stuff if you weren't looking. But the amount of detail that had to go into creating a fake company.
All that.
Putting all up. Yeah, it was interesting times, experimental times for the net.
Yeah, The Martian had. I remember The Martian had video footage of these astronauts getting ready to go to Mars, and Matt Damon, and there's something about the acting and all that which I want to bring up as a point. The biggest element of found footage which interests you and me is acting and the style of acting they use. But anyway, we'll come back to that later. So okay, cheap, innovative filmmaking, marketing is a big difference. That pushed the Blair Witch, and I think a lot of people saw dollar signs and think, oh, this could be an interesting way to make something really cheap and go viral. And it was, for me, I agree with you. I think Paranormal Activity was the one in terms of the horror genre that was like, holy fuck.
Yeah.
Yeah. But anyway, before we go into that, do you hear something? Did you hear that?
That was me moving.
Was it? Okay. All right. So weird. Firstly, AV Club's Scott Tobias said that in the noughties, found footage is what slasher films were in the 80s. Agree or disagree?
Yeah, I'd agree with that.
Yep. Okay, well, I was waiting for you to have a much more complex answer, so we're just powering through this.
I guess in the sense, I mean, we've already touched on it. In the sense, in the 80s, slashers was a big thing. Like Halloween came along. I know that was 78, but then when Friday the 13th was released and basically carbon copied that story and added a few rules into the mix, all of a sudden everybody wanted to do slasher films. And it was also the era of video home entertainment. That became a big thing. And so if we contrast that with the internet boom as well, then that's happening at the time when found footage is becoming a big thing too, and exploiting that in many ways. So that's yes. I know I said my answer was really short. That was why I was like, yeah, that makes sense to me. Yeah,
no, I agree. I think, and then that'll be interesting because in like the 80s slasher films are having a bit of a revival right now. It'd be interesting to see if found footage gets some sort of homage revival by the current next generation of filmmakers who are currently 18, 19 and are watching found footage films.
Almost like, myself and Miles Davies, a fellow podcaster, are big fans of the Mumblegore movement and the guys behind that. And they and that kind of already was happening fairly recently because Adam Wingard and his writing partner as well, and I've forgotten his name, Simon Barrett. They basically came out with the remake of or the sequel to Blair Witch Project, which was Blair Witch. We've also got The Sacrament, which I really wanted to make a note of and mention because that was by another guy within the Mumblegore movement, Ty West, and it's based on the Jonestown massacre. And it's told from the point of view of, and they almost do it like a Vice, you know, the guys that go out and they do that online kind of reporting. It's quite cutting edge and very MTV in the style of approach of how they go out and tackle taboo subjects that other reporters aren't necessarily focusing on. So the concept of The Sacrament is exactly that. It's told from one guy in the caravan, and they go with this guy whose sister is in this cult embedded in this kind of place somewhere in Africa. And they go to kind of find out what's going on. And we follow it from their point of view. and it's done really, really well. I'd heard about it, and I was meaning to watch it, and this podcast gave me a good reason to go and watch it, and I'm glad I did, because I feel personally the way it's done was a very clever, and how found footage films should be done. It cheats in a way. It cheats in a massive way. It doesn't play by the rules. In some respects, in the way it captures some of the footage. But by that point, you're forgiving of it, because the characters and the actors within it are strong enough to pull it through.
Yeah. I think that's the thing with found footage, is that you find if it's done really well, then it can cheat and you don't really notice.
Yeah.
The big one for me is when camera angles change.
Yes.
And if you're caught up in the drama of it all, you don't notice. But when you see it for like a fourth viewing, you just go, you take a step back and go, hang on, how did that? Where was that cutaway from? Who's filming that cutaway? But it's the Jaws thing.
Exactly.
Spielberg says you can't blow up a shark with an oxygen tank, but if he's done his job up to that point, yes, you can. So yeah.
There's a one bit again to reference the Sacrament where they kind of get around that, because the third character in the group, who's the brother of the sister, he's a photographer. So he was walking around with a camera anyway, and and the camera guy says to him, "Hey, does that thing shoot video?" And he goes, "Yeah." He goes, "Oh, can you just do this for me?" And so from that point on, when you were getting this shots, it was covered because they already mentioned it. So when you start going, "Oh, hold on, whose camera is that?" You kind of go, "Oh, that's right, that's something." Yeah, but they get around it. Kind of.
There's ways, and that's the thing. I think that's I think we'll talk about this later too, but I think found footage the early ones found out the limitations of one camera, even just two cameras, and you have to get ways around it. And there are ways around it, but the things I noticed was there's basically 4 cinematic techniques that found footage employs. One is first person perspective, which is somebody carrying camera, and then that camera is what you see and blah, blah. Other one is like full doco style, which is the way I said Spinal Tap, you said mockumentary. But if it's a case of like a crew of people all have a camera, then they're basically saying we're doing a documentary, and that they get killed or whatever, and their footage is found and is strung together.
That's why I argued the Spinal Tap one, because it's not.
Yeah.
It's a documentary. It's somebody a group of people telling their story. It's not okay. It's not gonzo journalism or anything like that. Like Hunter Thompson coined the phrase gonzo journalism, and basically the meaning behind that is that the journalist has inserted themselves into the story. And in this case, like Spinal Tap doesn't do that at all. What does do that is, and what I found really refreshing, and I only stumbled across this in my uni years, was a film that was released back in like the early 90s, and it was I think it was a French film, but it was called Man Bites Dog. And it's and I like a guy. It was a guy at university that said, "Oh, you've got to watch this." And I was like, "Oh yeah, fair enough." Oh no, I think it's Belgian. It's a Belgian film. And it's basically a black comedy crime mockumentary, and it's a group of filmmakers that follow a serial killer hitman around town, filming what he does to capture it. And slowly throughout the film, they start kind of being involved in the crimes themselves. So it was just done in a really, really clever way. And this was before Blair Witch came along. So for me, I was just like, yeah, that's a smart movie. And it's done like to me. And yes, it starts off as a documentary, but because the people who are supposedly meant to be observers start taking part in it, then that becomes a different story, and that then would fall into more found footage.
Okay. Well, the third one is news-style footage. The best example of this I can think of is Wreck.
Yes.
Which I remember seeing that for the first time with you in the Skyline Cinema where we worked.
Yeah.
And both came away thinking, fuck, that was really good. Mainly because you and I both were working on a show that was very similar to Wreck. The show that was the woman who was hosting a show, which became Wreck. So using news footage, string it together. Blah, blah, blah. The fourth style is surveillance footage.
Oh yeah.
I would argue most found footage horrors that if you say found footage, you think horror films, and you think a certain kind of horror film. I would argue it just uses two of them, which is the actual first person perspective, and it may use elements of news footage, surveillance footage, interview footage interspersed with it. A great example to me that combines all four was The Tunnel.
I was hoping you mention that.
Yeah, because that was a news crew where you see the news footage that they shoot, then you have them being interviewed by a post news crew after the incident, and there was a really clever moment where the main reporter in that movie has to ask permission to film in the tunnels, and she finally gets it, but of course he can't film her getting permission because it was just being too contrived. And the way they got around that was they literally cut to security footage of her being yelled at by her producer in a corridor. And that one scene, you don't hear anything. You just see this guy yelling, remonstrating in front of her. And you just see it's surveillance footage that's shot up on high. It's grainy. It's just got time code. But from that, you get the impression before and afterwards that she got what she wanted, which is permission to go in the tunnel. And again, it was very clever use of, okay, it's surveillance footage. Boom. And it reminds you, too, that this day and age, particularly now that people have mobile phones that are like basically they're mobile film studios, it is very easy to string footage together because we are being surveilled everywhere from every angle, and so on and so forth. And there's being more innovative ways of telling found footage horror stories through different kinds of cameras. Unfriended, I think, is probably a really big leap from that point of view. With the way it was all from a computer screen, using all different social media. But again, we'll talk about that film later too. But anyway,
just well, you may be mentioning it too as well. I wouldn't say this is found footage really, but that film Searching that came out a couple of years ago or last year. And it's from a point of view whose daughter's disappeared, and they were using social media within that, and cameras and phone cameras and
exactly.
So that was kind of an example again as well of blending those kind of things together. Going back to The Tunnel as well, I don't know if you're wanting to touch on that in a bit more detail, but one of the geniuses of that was casting a camera guy who could act.
Well, that was it. Yes, that was a question I had put in my original notes here, which I did take out. But it is something that needs to be asked, like who the fuck is filming? Because you would think if one of the good example would be Cloverfield. T.J. Miller was an absolute nobody, and he's the character that runs the camera in Cloverfield. And you either think, well, it's he's in Cloverfield, he gets literally 2, 3, 4 seconds on camera where he turns the camera around. So you're like, well, that poor sucker, he's like one of the main casts and he never gets his face on camera. We're never going to see him again. And he's going on to be the big star of all the entire cast of that entire film. He's the one who's got a fucking career, right? But obviously he didn't film it, right? And then I as a filmmaker, I was thinking the tricky thing about found footage is that you have a character holding on the cameras. How do you get around that character literally being behind the camera operator who's operating the camera?
Yeah.
And the beauty of The Tunnel, yes, you're right. The story goes, is they literally were like, well, how are we going to film this? We need a news Betacam camera operator, somebody who can play that. And then somebody told them, oh, there's a cameraman for Channel 9 who actually can act. And they kind of knew who he was. And they asked him, oh, can you act? And he said, yeah, I'm going to play and stuff like that. And I said, do you want to be in a film about camera operating? He went, okay. And so, yeah, that's another interesting fact about The Tunnel. All the footage that's being operated by that character is actually being operated by that character because he's a legit cameraman.
Yeah.
And I remember you and I were both at the premiere, I think, and one of the first questions somebody asked in the Q&A is, who operated the camera? And they pointed to him and said, it's him. And he stood up. And everybody was like, oh, what? But it so works. And the thing is authenticity, and that's another thing too about acting. The dialogue in that is so authentic because he is a genuine news gathering camera operator. Everything he says is genuine. The flow of how he says it, how he says it, is all very real because it is very real. He's done that sort of stuff. He's not been in a tunnel and been attacked by a monster. But if he was a camera operator in a tunnel, that's how he'd behave and that's how he'd act. And for somebody who's worked on...
Go on.
Now, so somebody who's worked on those sort of shows as a producer, it automatically felt authentic, the way those guys interacted, the way they bantered, the way they talked about levels. Can you say that again? Okay, stay there, I'll get it from another angle. All that was really authentic. What wasn't authentic is that he shot it on a Betacam tape, and those things only go for 40 minutes. And he shot the whole thing and it went for like 2 hours. That was the only thing that sort of took me out of it.
Yeah. But like, we ignore that stuff, don't we?
Yeah, we ignore that. Yeah, it's like bullets in a gun.
Yeah. I'm harping on about the sacrament again, but it's on a similar note because Joe Swanberg, who plays the camera guy in that, is actually an accomplished film director, producer, writer, and actor in his own right. He people might know him more from on screen in You're Next as the annoying brother character in it.
Yeah.
But he, because of his background, Ty West gave full kind of creative control to a lot of the actors, and that included Swanberg controlling the camera. So he is actually filming the stuff that is shot whenever he's behind. That's
fantastic. Yeah.
And doing his bits and pieces, and there's bits in there where he sets up. He knows where to position the camera, for instance, when they're in a cabin, to place it and be in shot when he then comes back in. To kind of sit down, and then he says, I'm just going to get another pack ready and I'm going to dump this tape so that we don't lose the footage. So they're covering stuff. They know it's like you were saying about it's the camera kind of jargon, essentially.
Yeah.
Because they know their staff. And a lot of the time they ad-lib what they're saying too. The group of actors in particular that were in this film are also some of the group of actors that are in You're Next. And a lot of that's improvisational kind of, stuff dialogue that they're talking about. I mentioned You're Next because both Swanberg, Bowen, Audley, and Simets are all in that film, and so is Ty West, the director, is in it. He's the first guy that gets shot with the eye. So the Mumblegorn movement is huge, and they know each other, and they kind of bounce off each other. And I think that creative team is important for found footage to be successful. You need to rely on each other's skills and talents for it to be pulled off.
Yeah, and I think in terms of ensemble, again, we'll harp it back to acting, but I think if it feels lived in, and found footage is supposed to be, it to some degree involves people who know each other. If the acting feels lived in, it just goes a long way to selling the authenticity. And there's good examples of where that doesn't work, which we'll cite later on at the end of this podcast. Okay, so let's talk about it as a horror genre. All right, pros and cons. Do you hear something? What was that? Oh, sorry, I thought I heard something. Anyway, weird. So let's talk about pros and cons. Why don't you like them, Saul?
I'm laughing at it because the reason I don't like it is exactly what you're doing.
Wait, you're seeing through that? Oh, I thought I was being subtle.
It's unbelievable. Okay. All right, to say I don't like them is probably a bit harsh. I would say I'm not a fan of them rather than don't like them. I just find them a tired and bored format. And you have to play it right in order for it to work. I am probably in the minority, but I do not like the Blair Witch Project. The reason I do not like the Blair Witch Project is because the 3 actors in it are fucking annoying, and a bunch of whiny Americans in the forest, and they could die really, really quickly rather than prolong our agony and see them getting lost, going round and round in circles, having a go at each other, having snot down their face before they get killed off. I'm I so prefer Wreck. I found that much more entertaining. She's a really good actress, and so, as soon as that I get hooked into that side of it, I'm a bit more forgiving for the actual style and approach of the film. As soon as, and that's why I'm friendly. I know you mentioned that too. Fucking hate that. It's a shit film with really annoying actors. Like not necessarily actors, the characters in that case are really fucking annoying. And you don't give a shit. You don't give a shit if they die. And because of that, you've got no buy-in. Are we supposed to root for the person killing them? But that's hard to do when you can't see the person that's killing them. I don't know, so you don't have a natural way in, a journey into it. I I like it needs to be a smarter way in. It needs to be a lot cleverer about the approach to the storytelling. It can't just rest on a premise and then go, all right, let's get these kind of actors in and we're just going to ad-lib stuff. If I am going to say something about Blair Witch that I do like, I like the fact that the directors basically surprise the actors, so the stuff you're seeing is genuine.
But that also harbours to your methodology as an actor too. You like to break people down and build them back up again. That Blair Witch did that to the extreme, didn't they?
Yeah, I do, and our friend Chad will probably be aware of that too, because I early on in a project that we were working on, I got him to play a certain scene over and over again, and just kept adding certain different elements to it. We kind of build that character up essentially. But yeah, that's what I like. That's how I like and approach stuff, because you've got to be able to live and breathe that character by the time the camera's rolling. And I know some actors won't like that approach because they'd be like, well, I'm trained in that. It's my job to bring the character in it. And I completely agree with them. But then my job as a director is to go, all right, I want now to see that. I now want to see that character do this. And if they know the character well enough, they should be able to just switch that on.
Yeah.
Not go away and go, right, well, I interpret it as this. All right, yeah, okay. That's fine. Interpret it as that, but do it with this happening. How would that character react when this is happening?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So, yeah. At the end of the day, if they're not comfortable with what's been shot, they really are kind of like, no, that doesn't sit. And I go, yeah, cool. Well, we experimented with it. It didn't work.
Yeah.
But I wanted us to go there on a creative journey to see what would happen in that instance.
Yeah.
So, yeah. I'll be a bastard later, wouldn't I?
I just think you like excuses to torture people. But okay, so let's go through the pros and cons. The pros for me, there's only one major big pro from a filmmaking point of view, is that they're cheap to make. They're easy to make compared to traditional coverage films.
Yep.
You don't need expensive cameras, but you don't need different setups. You don't need a shot reverse, dolly track, wide shot, mid shot, close up. You can capture slabs of dialogue, slabs of pages in one take, and you just spend your money on set dressing and props and wardrobe. And if you're trying to make it a naturalistic environment, like a documentary environment, then you shoot where you shoot. Choose somebody's house, and that's where you go. And obviously, Paranormal Activity, one of the many reasons why that was so successful was they shot inside the director's house.
Yeah.
And that's it. They shot for how many nights, and they'd made so much money, he was able to renovate that house and shoot the sequel there. So that's a major pro. Cons. From a filmmaking point of view, limitations in coverage. You always have, if you do the traditional found footage horror film with somebody walking around with a camera, you're limited to that camera's perspective. So you're always at eye level for a start, usually. Limited to lack of angles. Lack of cutaways is a good example. Have you seen 1917 yet?
No, I really want to. I was going to ask your opinion on that because I heard mixed reviews.
No, I think it's fucking epic. It's cinematic. It's the reason why you go to see movies in the movies, all of that. And it has that natural rhythm to it. So the acting is very, it's quite naturalistic. It's and there's moments of just them walking and talking, which you don't mind because it's just tense because you know their situation. And when the tension happens, it's happening in real time because it's all one take. But there's an interesting moment where they're literally going.
It's not all in one take.
It's stitched take. But there's a moment where it occurred to me, like when you see it in the promo, you see it where Colin Firth briefs the two soldiers in that they need to go and find this guy's brother who's in another army regiment and to tell them not to attack. And he says, here on the map here. And so straight out of my mind as a director, I need to cut away the map. But you can't do that. So the camera has to move over their shoulders and down to the map. But then they have to do another little piece of interesting blocking to get you to see the map, which was a little contrived, but it's only if you're looking for it because you realize the director was limited in the fact that he couldn't cut away to the map. There's another interesting thing is they have to go over to no man's land. And they literally, what you do back in World War One, they had those little periscopes that you look up through.
Yeah.
And it's Major's telling them, okay, look through the periscope, look to the left, look for a dead horse, behind that is a thing that you run through, right? And again, one of the characters literally sticks his head through this periscope, and you think, I want to see what he has to see, but you can't see that because it's not one take.
Yeah.
So he's just he has to describe it really viscerally.
Yeah.
For you, the audience, to get what he's saying. So again, straight away, even though this was a traditional film, the fact that he was like, I'm doing this in one take, it limited how he was covering things. So you had to come up with really interesting ways to make you engaged and make you realize the information he wants to get across is getting across.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's the limitation with found footage documentary cameras, is that you're limited to one camera, and one camera angle. But again, other films have found ways to try and get around this. The biggest one for me was Chronicle. Because Chronicle involved a bunch of guys who get superpowers and get telekinesis.
Yeah.
And so, because they're filming themselves, right? They're filming cameras of their own as kids. They're vlogging, basically. But because they can lift cameras with their psychic powers, suddenly the camera angles can change, and they can operate more than one camera. And suddenly the camera angle's floating around like a Steadicam. And so suddenly, bang, they're getting traditional film coverage because they're moving the cameras around with their mind, which made me think, okay, that's kind of a clever way around it. But weirdly enough, it took me out of the film because suddenly it felt like a traditional film and not a found footage film. But the fact that I can get multiple camera angles in there, and it was really, really interesting. So yeah, that's a big con in terms of the coverage. You get other things like the big one for us, obviously, is like as soon as shit goes down, you drop the camera, or when nothing's going on, you turn the camera off because you want to conserve battery power and memory, right? That doesn't happen in found footage. So you get things where people shoot computer screens because there's a vital piece of information playing on a computer screen, so they film it so you can see what they're seeing. Nobody does that. Nobody would do that in real life. You would turn off the camera. And I think one film that lent into that really well was Cloverfield. I think Cloverfield did a very clever. There's one bit where the monster comes out and T.J. Miller's character's seen it, and he says to the others, I've seen it. I'll turn off the camera and I'll show it to you. And then you see the camera turn off, turns back on to see their reaction and going, I can't believe I just saw that. That was clever because that's kind of how it would happen. You don't see what he's just seen. And the fact that you've seen them now going, oh my God, I can't believe what you just saw, makes you go, what the fuck did they just see? That was kind of clever. And also, too, the fact that it was an old-fashioned camera, so he was wiping over tape. He was wiping over bits of previous tape on that tape, but what he was wiping over was giving away evidence, clues to some of the other characters' past and so on and so forth. I think that was clever the way that was going. But it is leading to an interesting question of who the fuck is stringing this footage together, which most found footage films don't address. Who put the footage together for you? So obviously it's been edited in a certain way to tell a story. And usually what comes with a lot of it is that who's putting this music on? Because a lot of these found footage films still have music on them. I think The Tunnel has music on it as well.
Yeah.
Whereas if it's to be true found footage, it's not supposed to have any music on it at all. And the good ones still achieve what they have to achieve without music. The big one, though, is bass, which you've noticed as well, is whenever a ghost or demon's about to appear, the bass suddenly gets really loud.
Yeah, because and also that's because audiences have become used to that as a cue. So they still have to play by those kind of rules, So, yeah.
Yeah. So, again, you get a number of problems that aren't certainly realistic. Certainly for me, for you and I, the big one is when shit goes down, you drop the camera. You don't fucking shoot stuff. So why are you still filming is a big question that comes up an awful lot in a lot of these films. An answer that a lot of characters come up with is I have to film everything for documentation or to prove I'm okay. Again, The Tunnel had that with the cameraman decided to cover himself by filming everything, which again makes sense, but at the time he was using digibeta cameras, so they go through 40 minutes at a time. I don't know how many cameras, how many tapes he had on him, but yeah. But it doesn't make sense an awful lot of the time to say, I just need to film everything. It's also impractical because your battery just won't last an entire night or day, how many times it goes. So why? Anyway, and the other big one is. Wait, did you hear that? What was that? Did you hear something? So, a lot of films have multiple pivot points where everything flips. In found footage horror films, that seems to be the only time shit goes down, is when somebody says, seriously, did you hear that? What was that? Did you hear something? that is the moment that comes in all of these films, right?
Yeah.
And it's very real. I guess it's a cliche for a reason. Is that it would be realistic if you're in a found footage film that involves aliens or demons or ghosts or a serial killer, then you're probably going to go, wait, did you hear that? But it's said an awful lot.
Yeah.
Now, this is something I want to talk to you about. A real life found footage film. It's
You've said this.
There's an abandoned warehouse, abandoned wildlife park in Melbourne.
Yeah.
Where they had animals and all sorts of things. It was literally down tools, abandoned. A bunch of guys from Melbourne University or something literally jumped the fence with their cameras and decided they're going to check it out. And they were literally like, "Oh, let's go scope around." And they literally go into like a wombat enclosure. So it looks like, imagine Taronga Zoo or any other zoo, just abandoned. So they went to this fake rock cave environment where they put the snakes behind glass thing, and they walk in and everything's literally abandoned. Like they went through the cafeteria. There's cash registers, there's computers lying around. At one point, and it goes for like 40 minutes, and at about the 30-minute mark, they go into this. Again, it looks like a cafeteria / kids playpen, and they find this huge fuck off green tank, like a huge aquarium tank. And this guy's going, "Oh wow, that's weird. It's green." It's like, "Oh, it must have like gone stagnant or weird." And he kind of films it for a little bit, and they do go, "What's that smell? That's funky." But he kind of gets distracted by like a whack-a-mole because it's a kids' amusement park part as well. So he starts filming that, and he goes around this green tank, and he turns around, and you see the camera pivot, and his mate goes, "What the fuck is that?" And in the silhouette of this green tank is this giant fuck-off shark. It's a shark silhouette of a great white, and it's creepy as fuck because it's this light's just streaming into this really dark place, and you see the silhouette of a dead shark. And so they're going, "Oh, that's obviously fake." And then no one goes, "Hang on, that's formaldehyde that we're smelling. That's real." And it's actually a dead great white shark in the middle of this great green fuck-off tank, and it's just creepy as hell. And it's a real life found footage sort of moment. And they literally since found out it is a real life shark that got captured back in 19 blah whatever, thrown in this tank in formaldehyde, and it was just beginning to decompose. And they literally rescued it. They've since pulled it out, and then somebody's bought it, and they've since cleaned it up. And it's a 3.5 meter great white shark. But it's this middle of this green goopy tank, and it's just creepy. And it's so creepy. It's so cool, and it's real. Like these guys are going, "What the fuck?" It's a shark. They didn't find a dead shark. So,
cool.
But it's almost that moment of like, wait, what was that? Did you hear that? Okay. The other big thing for found footage films for me, and we're going to be talking about this one a fair bit, acting.
Yeah.
Acting. This is my conclusion on found footage film acting. It has to be precise.
Yeah.
It can't be realistic. It has to be naturalistic.
Yes.
And by that I define realistic to me is the sort of acting that you and I and everybody else has grown up watching in films, Hollywood films, Australian films, English films, BBC drama. It's acting that's good. It draws you in. But if you sit back and take a step back, you realize people don't behave exactly that way.
Yeah.
But they behave. It's a style of acting, just like people grew up in the 1930s listening to radio drama that speaks like this. Yes, yeah. It's like news. Fucking you watching the news. All Australian news readers speak like this. They speak up in inflection. Channel 9 News. And pronunciation. It's all everything you see in Hollywood now. You think, oh, that's really real. It's not. It's a style of acting that you feel is real and draws you in, and it's a great performance and everything else. But as soon as you take a person who acts like that and put them in a found footage type film that's passing off as a real life thing, it feels really forced. It does to me anyway. And a good example for that for me is The Devil's Pass. It's something I wanted to play an audio excerpt from it, but it doesn't quite work if you just hear the audio. You've got to see it. But you have a filmmaking student and an editor, and they're talking about the Dyatlov Pass, which is a real life incident involving hitchhikers, Russian hikers. Sorry, not sure, hitchhikers. Russian hikers who got killed in the mountains, and they don't know why. And these guys come across as so fake to me. Their performance is so off, and it's only because they're acting like as if they're in a traditional film. And I think to me, naturalistic acting works much better. It's like cinema verite acting or doco acting. You have to be. You know it when you see it. You know it when it puts you off. You know when it's fake. And when it's not, it draws you in. And to me, it's the difference between naturalistic acting and realistic acting.
Yes, I agree.
And I think that's a mistake a lot of found footage films make. The Devil's Pass was directed by the guy who directed Die Hard 2. And he was a massive director in the 80s and 90s. Rennie Harlan, married to Gina Davies.
He also directed one of the Nightmare on Elm Street films.
Yes. And I don't know, he just, because he was used to dealing with actors in that way, he let them perform that way. For me, it just doesn't work. I mean, The Devil's Pass is an interesting found footage film anyway. And the actual story itself is okay. But that to me was what put me out of it straight away. And it was the first time I took notice that, actually, why is this feeling weird? And that's the reason why for me, is that the acting is wrong. To me, it is almost like the old improv class of like, you get a bunch of actors, your objective in the scene is A, B, and C, your objective in the scene is D, E, and F. Do it in that order, go for it. Again, if you've done a job as a director, this is your character's background, this is the way your character feels, how he reacts and how he thinks, then if you trust them, then let them do it, and they get there in their own way. I think it's a fine line with most things, because if you get people and just improv, they'll just waffle. And some found footage films have that as well, where characters waffle, and you just like get to the point. It's almost like it's too real, because again, it's that balancing act of like you're just trying to tell a story, get the information out there in a compelling way that draws you in. But the acting's a big one for me. And I think this is where a lot of found footage films tend to go wrong. I think it's a fine line to hit, and you need people who are naturally charismatic, but they got to draw you in. And it falls back to your point too. If their characters are fuckwits or douchebags, that makes it that much harder to draw you in as well. You got to, and again, it's the thing of that's clever writing. You can't just have heroes and likable people as well. You got to give them flaws, you got to give them depth and dimension, but you can't just make them fuckwits, which is another thing too, which annoys the hell out of me as well. Is that the characters that a lot of these found footage films write tend to be just annoying, almost for the sake of being annoying, or for the sake of creating conflict.
Like Grave Encounters as well is a good example of that.
That's a great example. Right. Grave Encounters is a great example of a great first film. What the fuck happened the second time round? But yeah, I mean, Grave Encounters, it does push the line because it's a documentary crew. The lead guys are fucked hard. Yeah. The cameraman's a whiny bitch, and the girl is kind of whiny as well, and the psychic in it's clearly a fake. But they're all douchebags. You kind of understand where he's coming from. The lead guy, that he's trying to get a show up and running, and he's desperate to make it a good show. But I think the fact that the film itself moved along at a good pace, the twists were kind of clever, and it's unusual enough. Like what happens, the horror bits between the tension bits happen at an even enough pace, and the effects get bigger. And that's the thing too. I think a lot of people assume that found footage films are cheap, but doesn't mean you can't have special effects in there. And I think the quality of special effects over the last 10, 15 years in shaky camera footage has improved as well.
Yeah.
But I think that, Grave Encounters is great. Then you get the Grave Encounters 2, and you get this young filmmaker who's a fucktard and an absolute dick with no redeeming qualities whatsoever. And I'm like, I'm following this guy. Why? He's using his friends. We're all kind of dickheads anyway. And nothing happens for like an hour. And that's the classic thing of any horror film is tension, set up, tension, payoff. Tension, payoff, tension, payoff. And you have the James Wan school of thought, which is less payoff, more tension. Yeah. Because more tension makes the payoff bigger. Mm-hmm. And again, good found footage films do this really, really well. They seem to know when to push the tension before the payoff, and to know when too little is too little and too much is too much. Grave Encounters had no sense of like, just give us something, dude. And when shit finally happens, you don't care. Yeah. You kind of want them to die. Whereas Grave Encounters, the first one, got it just right. So, what's your take? You're an actor. Sorry, I did waffle on a fair bit there. What is your take on the acting style found footage?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I guess that's what it comes... For me, that's what it comes down. I kind of semi-mentioned that earlier on. But, like, you know, it's not necessarily to do with found footage either. Like, it's with any film. Like the acting is paramount for you to buy the story. So firstly, you have to have a good plot structure, and you have to have a good script in place. On the thing with found footage is that it tends to lean on improvisation and pockets of it because of to kind of strike home the realism of it. So that's where the acting becomes even more paramount and important for it to be convincing. We've named a couple of examples of where that works. And I know you mentioned about The Devil's Pass, and for me, it wasn't just the acting; it's the dialogue was clunky in that too.
Yeah,
because there are pockets when so they're relying on the editor dude to be the one that has the information about certain. Like he's meant to be like almost a bit like the Mulder kind of character.
Yeah, he's the Wikipedia of the group. Yeah,
yeah. So but when he comes out with this information, it doesn't fit with his character for the rest of the time. It just doesn't marry. So you just and that pulls you out the film because it's it's like crowbarring this information in because it's important in order to make the story believable, and that's the wrong way to go about it. So look, it's it's not. Yeah, the acting. My point is the acting is paramount, and I know I mentioned The Sacrament, but that to me was a great example of that. There's areas, and we haven't mentioned it before, but I watched As Above, So Below.
Can I say something about that film?
Yeah.
The courtyard where the two of the characters meet. There's a fountain in that courtyard. That's where I met my wife.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Yeah. In the background of the movie.
Yeah. No, we're in the background. No, yeah. Literally, I bought that movie as hey, let's watch this, and Sarah rolled her eyes, and we played it, and we both went, what the fuck? We saw the fountain, and was like, that's where we met. What?
That's hilarious.
Yeah, weird.
Anyway, yeah.
Go on.
No. So it was more that I found the woman annoying in that. I didn't.
Dude, is she so fucking annoying?
Yeah.
Have you seen the pyramid one? There's one called Pyramid. Or
no,
some
I
shit.
wanted to see that one.
Jesus, that's the worst acting. That's the worst acting. It does not work. But she was almost at that level. I thought the way she's the scientist and she's like the best of her class. And
that's right. And it was just a bit I kind of dug the bloke. I thought he was good. But he's been on lots of things, and my mind's just Ben Feldman, that's his name. He was in Mad Men as an example for a bit. He's a good actor, and so I found his bit a bit more believable. But then the problem with that is that it just made it more noticeable how bad she was.
I can't cite any real life examples I know about something like that.
Yeah.
Wait, did you hear something? What was that?
No.
Okay, sorry.
Don't know.
Imagination.
I think it's the waft of inability to act. What else? But then VHS, we kind of haven't mentioned VHS yet.
Oh God, yeah, yes.
So, but again, that comes back to some of the Mumblecore guys were behind that, and these guys can fucking act, and they know how the camera moves, they know how the shots are set up, and they know each other enough to get into a scenario and ad-lib and make the dialogue believable. And that you can see elements of that in VHS as well, and the way that's set up. So I guess that, these are points where I don't like Paranormal Activity, and I'm why
is that?
It's boring. It relies on jump scares, and the actors are boring. The characters are boring. Did I say it's boring? I'm sitting there just kind of going. If I wanted to sit at home and watch CCTV cameras of someone's house, I'd set some up and just kind of watch that. that to me is not entertaining. So I just was bored through it. And that comes back to scripts, you know. I admire the fact, don't get me wrong, I admire the fact that they shot this thing really cheaply, and sure, it resonated with the audience enough so that they went on and made it a success. So for that, I've got to take my hats off for them, you know, making this thing, and it worked. It just didn't connect with me. You know, so... and you know, whiny Americans again. You know, I just don't. It just doesn't fly with me. So yeah, I haven't seen that Europa Report one. I know you were mentioning that one. So I can't...
Well, again, it has big name actors in it, and they do.
Yeah, I just couldn't get a copy of it. So.
Oh, okay. I'll lend you the DVD. It might be on Netflix, anyway, whatever. But I've got a DVD of it anyway. But it is big name actors doing more traditional Hollywood style acting. It kind of works because it's set on a spaceship and it's surveillance footage on a spaceship.
Yeah.
And so it has a kind of an effects budget and so on and so forth. So I didn't mind it. And again, because it's science fiction, I was like, okay. It was okay. But yeah, I think...
question for you, Ant, though. So, do you think you'd have to be a fan of reality TV in order to then buy into the found footage genre?
Well, I found interesting. In my notes, I wrote down reality TV ? A couple times because I'm not a fan of reality TV. I've only got into it recently because my wife's a big fan of it.
Yeah,
and she got me into watching a few of these things, and I just straight away you realize there's a formula to them. There's a way that they make them. The big break from reality for me from reality TV is whatever, say a cooking show, right? In a cooking show, they'll show somebody cooking something and they stuff up, right?
Yeah,
and they'll cut to that person being interviewed in a separate part of the studio going, oh, and the bit where I dropped the eggs is when I stuffed up. I'm really hoping this doesn't get me out of the finals or whatever. Cuts back to them cleaning up the eggs and going, oh shit, what I'm going to do? Oh no, I'll do something else. And it cuts back to them in that interview chair going, and then I thought I'll do something else. I'm like, okay, the way you're presenting this reality is that this person's cooking, had to run to the interview chair, do an interview, come back to the cooking. Like the way they edit it, as like if you step back and realize everything that person's done in the interview chair is done at least a day or two after the cooking. So they know they're going to fuck up. They know that they're going to fix it. They know if they've won or they lost. Yet they keep saying, if I don't do this right, I could get knocked out of the final or whatever. Mm-hmm. The thing is, they're presenting a false reality. By the time the person's in the interview chair, they know what happened. And it's that bending of reality. And I think, that some found footage films use that device as well. So it is contriving a reality that's supposed to be this when actually it isn't. So I just found that really interesting. I think the other big thing, which we have touched on, but for me, I think that really annoys me about a lot of the way these things are constructed, is they develop conflict between characters just for the sake of conflict. So you have excuse, particularly, and which gives the characters an excuse to just yell at each other for minutes on end, and you're like, I don't care about this fight. I have no. That's what tends. That's another big mistake. Don't fucking do that if you're going to make a found footage film. Again, back into the scripting. And there's always one person who's trying to exploit everybody else because he's selfish. It's usually the reason of like, why are we going down this dark tunnel? Because we have to, and then drags everybody else with him.
Yes.
And then he ends up regretting it and being really sorry at the end of it. I'm sorry I dragged you into this. That's a cliche as well.
All right. So, and the other thing we haven't mentioned Troll Hunter as well. That was another one I didn't talk about because I was actually last night was talking on one of the platforms with one of these people who mentioned Troll Hunter, and I said to them, they never answered me, but like loads of people saying they loved the film. And it had a good, and I agree with them. I think it's great. It's a great way of using fantasy and mythology, and putting a modern kind of twist on it. And the acting again is solid and believable in it to carry that journey through. But I think the mythology helps because it's that fantastical kind of element to it. So you're already allowing the audience to step into another world, if you will.
Well, I think the clever thing about that film and what the tunnel did is that it married it to something that could possibly be real in our world. So that film was about the mythology of trolls living up in the mountains of blah blah blah.
Yeah.
The tunnel was about the mythology of there's tunnels underneath train stations in Sydney, which is both completely true. There are tunnels underneath Sydney, and there's mountains that have legends with trolls on them. The thing about troll hunting for me was like, I would call it. It's probably not. It is. I'm pretty sure it's not. But for me, it was the first found footage, shaky camera, cheap doco quality footage that had big budget special effects in it, and it looked pretty seamless. And it made me realize, oh shit! Just because it's a cheap found footage film, cheap in inverted commas, doesn't mean it can't have high production end values in terms of special effects.
Yeah.
And that was the first for me of that sort of film, and then other films followed suit. Another one, it's a high quality found footage film. It's a Hollywood quality found footage film. Was District 9 for me.
Yeah.
Which it's shot on clearly really high end. If it's shot on as a documentary film camera, it's shot on really nice cameras. But it's presented, you forget that it's a doco because it's a science fiction hardware film. Aliens, robots that shoot lasers and shit, or explosions. But it's following this. It's a documentary clue following this lead guy. And he's a Hollywood actor too. Well, he's gone on to have a career in Hollywood as well. But there's an interesting thing. At the very beginning, he's being mic'd up, and he's pretending like he's never been interviewed before. And the question, always these found footage films, when they're interviewing an expert or professor about something, the first thing they say is, "Do I look at you or look at the camera?" And he says that in this particular film, but it's the classic go-to line of somebody who's like, "Oh, I don't know, I've never been interviewed before. Do I look at you or look at the camera?"
Yeah.
And he says that. So, by the way he says it kind of worked. And he really came across as a guy who's never been interviewed before. So I've just contradicted myself because I would say he's a realistic actor. He uses realistic acting techniques, but it works really well in this film. Mind you, I mean, District 9 came across as a Hollywood production value film, even though technically it's found footage. So, yeah, there you go. Anyway, big budget or low budget, which leads me into my next question. Does higher film quality detract from found footage films, do you think, Saul?
For me, like, it needs to feel a bit rough around the edges.
Yeah.
And not polished. When it's polished, it becomes too... if it's polished, it's just got to be done in a certain way. Like, I mean, that's not to say, like, it can't work at high end, because it can. But it just has to, I guess there's more attention on the blemishes when it's high end. Whereas when it's low end, people forgive the blemishes.
It's like how some deep fake videos out there look really super realistic because they're on YouTube. And you try and I saw Gemini Man recently, and that's the high end latest special effects. They innovated some new techniques to de-age Will Smith. Yeah. Some shots it looks really good. Other shots it looks so fucking computer game fake it's not funny.
Yeah.
And they all the filmmakers were all like, only now we've reached the stage of technology where we can pull off a film like this and it looks absolutely amazing. And you're like, are you fucking kidding me? There's one bit where you see young Will Smith and Clive Owen, is that his name? He's literally patching the wounds on his back. And young Will Smith, it's in the trailer. He talks about how he met old Will Smith, and old Will Smith could, every move I made, he seemed to know in advance. And the camera tracks around, and he looks so fake. His eyes just look wrong. The way his eyes move are wrong. Things later in the film when they're fighting, and it looks completely real. I think a lot of it is he looks real when the lighting's low, and it's a bit shadowy on his face. It just looks real. Looks more, but when the lighting's flat and even, it just like you can see it all in blemishes. You can see all where it's not working. So again, back to your point you were saying too. I think if it's too high end, then it's too slick. And certain, when you like I said, certain high end Marvel de-aging videos, de-aging effects just don't work. Then you see somebody who deep fakes Jim Carrey's face onto Jack Nicholson from The Shining, and it looks completely real. So there's something about low end res and less pixels to work with. I think. I think
so. I think because by the very nature of the genre itself, the moment it becomes polished, you start questioning it. You know, because if it's supposedly like found footage, like why
who found it?
Polished TV, you know, like
and why did you give it a 7.1 surround sound soundtrack?
But I wonder, like, if I'll throw a question back to you. So the Blair Witch sequel, which we kind of half mentioned about, uses a lot of cutting edge technology, and they had drones in it at one point. What is it, do you think, that made that film fail in the box office? Why did that not resonate with the audience?
I think it was basically too long between drinks. I think it was the film itself I enjoyed. I thought it was fine. But it is one of those things. It's the reason why did Indiana Jones 4 didn't work? Why is Star Wars Episode 7, 8, 9? Why didn't that work? Because so much has been built up in between from other films and other genres. Not other genres, other films in the same genre. People had moved on past it. I think one of the reasons why. See, for me, like here's the thing: Star Wars changed the world. It came out, it changed the world. Nobody had ever seen anything like this before. Empire Strikes Back came out. It gave us two really cool things that we hadn't seen. Like, Star Wars only gave us a glimpse into the universe. What Empire Strikes Back did really, really well was gave us another aspect of the Star Wars universe we hadn't seen before, which was really visually fucking cool. And that was the giant walkers, the snow walkers, coming across the mountain. And they're fucking huge. That's so fucking cool. And you shoot them and you got to trip them up, and it's really cool. The other big special effect, which nobody had ever seen before, was Yoda. Yoda was a puppet that was so realistic that nobody had ever seen anything like that before. So as a movie, it gave us the same universe but more and bigger, and it showed us a bigger glimpse into this amazing world. It worked. Then came fucking Jedi, and they had a bunch of fucking stuffed Muppets running around, Ewoks, and it's just dumb. And then the thing is, massive gap. You have the prequels, dumb, but bigger gap, and you get the episodes 7, 8, 9. Just stuff's been done, man. Like spaceship, they gave us more lightsabers, they gave us more spaceships, they gave us another evil empire and another resistance. They gave nothing was new. Like it's because, and even then, if they gave us something that was too radically new, because so much water had flown under the bridge. You go, well, that's not a Star Wars film. Which a lot of the fans, the dickhead fans, have a problem with. Like, that's not a Star Wars film. Well, that is. Black Stormtrooper, that's not a Star Wars film. Oh, Asian Girl, that's not, like, fuck you. But that's it. That was the problem. So much water had gone under the bridge. There's nothing you could have done that made you go, oh my God, that's Star Wars, but even bigger and better, right? Because in between, you've had things like Aliens and fucking all these other amazing franchise films and the special amazing sci-fi films with amazing sci-fi effects, all thanks to Lucas and all thanks to ILM and shit. But we've seen bigger and better already. So with Blair Witch, so much water had gone under the bridge. There's so many other found footage films which are great and fantastic. Going back to Blair Witch is like, well, we kind of seen that. Unless you give us something bigger and better, which it didn't do. It didn't expand. Again, that whole rules about sequels, right? It didn't expand in the mythology and all that. All we know is that the Blair Witch can destroy drones as well. So that's why it didn't work. It's like too much water had passed under the bridge, and I think there's something to be said about it. You can't go back beyond a certain point. I mean, they're talking about, me. I'm a big Joss Whedon fan. I think that's been brought up once or twice before in this podcast.
Yes, maybe.
I'm a massive Firefly fan, right? Firefly. I think it's an amazing series. I would say you can't go back. You couldn't go back to it because there's talk about doing another Firefly series with another cast, like Firefly: The Next Generation. Maybe you can, but part of me just like, that was lightning in a bottle. I don't know. I mean, don't get me wrong. If they do it, I'll watch it out of curiosity.
But theoretically, there was a Star Trek and a Star Trek Next Generation, and both. Yes,
I was going to say Next Generation. That was different. That was but again, that gave you something that was different. They at least decided to build on. Okay. Let's not have Kirk. Let's have Picard, who's like the thinking man's evolved Kirk. Yeah. Let's have holodeck technology. Okay, that was something completely brand new, which worked.
That's all I'm saying. Like, if they did play with something like that and kept it in the same universe, it could work. But
but that's exactly. That's if you that goes into my next question, Saul. Okay, I'm tasking you. I want you to make me a found footage horror film. What would you put in it? What would you do? What would you put in it? What sort of things would you have and not have?
Found footage horror film. Well, you're asking somebody who's not a fan of found footage horror films.
I know. Consider it as a test. You finally get your break in Hollywood, and you come home, and your wife goes, "How'd it go?" And you go, "You don't fucking believe this shit."
Yeah, I mean, like, it needs to. All right. Okay. The first thing I would look at is source material.
Yep.
And I would look at trying to find something that has a strong enough story to begin with. I think is paramount in order to leverage from. An example of that I mean by that, and where I'm kind of heading with that, is that when you first start to learn to write creative stories, I tell you one of two things. Well, it kind of combines itself. One is like write from what you know.
Yeah.
The second one is like, if you haven't got a story yourself, take an existing story and twist it. So, and often that's why they go pick a fairy tale. Like you get it at schools and stuff. You go pick a fairy tale, write that, but write it in a different way. It's interesting, right? So, and that's why Troll Hunters is interesting, and that's why I mentioned it, because I like the idea of having an existing known mythology and building on that in a different way. So I would look at something like that first. Like Cloverfield essentially is like a big monsters told from a one person or a couple of people's perspective.
Person on the street's point of view, yeah.
So that would probably be my first thing, would be that needs to be strong enough first. It's why Blair Witch works, because they built up the background story of the Blair Witch first. There's like 4 or 5 instances of weird things happening in that area before we then get the story that we follow these 3 filmmakers going out to explore that. Because the writers have done the enough background in order to make it believable. So that would be my number one, would be that. Then it would be, all right, okay, now you've got that, but now you need to have the actors. You need to have strong actors to make that believable and make that world believable. There are people that can act in that craft. There are people, it's like, all right, whose line is it anyway? I know it's off topic, but these guys are hired for that show because they are the best in the field to do improv comedy. Right? That's what you want to be looking at. You want to have people that are able to do that kind of. Did you hear something?
Was
that?
Should I? Hang on. I'm sure it's nothing.
Yeah. Okay. Sorry. It was my turn. That was weird because that was my turn. I actually generally. That was weird. It was like a clicking sound. Anyway, so. So my point is that you need people that know their craft, right? And I'm talking about them a lot, but the Mumblegore guys do, and that's why I think it works. I think and the reason I was asking about Blair Witch was because technically that's the Mumblegore guys behind that, but it didn't work. That's why I was curious to know your thoughts on it, because I feel like that's the one rare misbeat in their work. But yeah, so I would like to see something like that, but like just something different, like, and I'm a bit like that anyway. Like when you go and see a movie, you want to be treated to something different. So the found footage has fallen into a trap of becoming formulaic. So you need to do something that can break out of that mold. Like there's a reason that slasher films stopped being made in the towards the end of the 80s, because like people have tried and tested it. It's starting to come back a bit with the Blumhouse movement, production guys coming back and re-exploring some of those avenues. And then you get Happy Death Day, which was an interesting way of exploring the slasher genre in a different way. I'm a huge fan of slasher films, so I'd love to see that come back and be a bit clever. It's like you said though, like Freddy, the Nightmare on Elm Street remake came out and it tanked, because it doesn't work without Robert Englund's presence. And also we've been talking about that franchise a lot, but like, it's it kind of died. Like the Freddy's Dead film that came out, the sixth one. By that point, Freddy was so farcical, he was no longer scary. So it took Wes Craven to come back into the fold and create a new nightmare and re-envision it. And I love that movie, and we've just done a podcast on that too. And I actually threw in the comment that we have about sequels, because to me, that's a way of doing a great sequel that kind of lives within the universe, but it sits outside of it and adds something new. So I don't know exactly what story I would pick up and run with. I'd have to really immerse myself into a particular subject, and say, I probably would need to say to him, okay, give me time. I'm going to need to go away and write something up, but then come back with a bit of an idea of a story that I think would work. I was really interested in seeing, and I never got around to it, but seeing either Willow Creek or Exists.
Right.
Because the whole that kind of interests me, of the search of Bigfoot, and we have our own kind of folklore story out here, which is about the Yowie, right? The Yeti Yowie kind of stuff, and I'm interested in exploring that in a journalistic way myself, as an aside. So that plays with the idea of what that would mean if I was to shoot that and explore that, and how would you make that interesting. But yeah, anyway, that's my own sort of thoughts on it. Does that answer your question or not?
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah, no, it's an interesting thing. I mean, I think I had very definitive ideas of what I think makes a good found footage film, what doesn't, and which we talked about. But for me, as I delved deeper into it, I realized it is a fine line. It's tough to get right. It is a fine balance, because it is such a saturated market now. They say there's over 500 of them. 500 have been made. I think it's more than that. But I think it is about, it's got to be balanced. The acting has to be right. You can't just let people improv exactly, but it has to be more of an improv style. But you can't let people run riot. And it's also, from an editing point of view, how you tell the story, how you don't fall into cliches. How do you... Wait, sorry, did you hear that?
What?
I thought I heard something. Sorry.
Okay.
But how you don't fall into cliches, and don't fall into things that make you step back and go, things like, why haven't they dropped the camera? But I mean, body cameras is a way to get around that. I mean, there's a cop found footage film where it's all about body cameras. Therefore, the camera's always on. It's always at a chest level. So there's all that, but
on that note too, there's a Korean found footage horror film that's called Gonjam Haunted Asylum. Sorry, Gonjiam. I presume that's how you pronounce it. It's based on an actual real life psychiatric hospital which is supposed to be haunted, and the same kind of concept. It's like 4 or 5 people, kind of cameras on their heads, go in and kind of investigate it, essentially to prove and debunk the stories that's behind the place. And it's like the third most watched horror film in South Korea. It's a huge film. Came out a few years ago, and it's enjoyable. Some bits in it are a bit farcical, but yeah, it does exactly that kind of point that you're saying about. And so does As Above, So Below as well. Uses the same.
Yeah. Well, I think that's it too. It's that you got to have the conflict's got to be grounded in some sort of realism. You can't have people just yelling at each other and being dicks for the sake of being dicks. It's tough. You got to have reasons for them to do what they do that doesn't feel super contrived, and the footage. And even maybe address the big question: who the fuck put this together for you? Maybe that's something you got to do as well. So I don't know. I mean, even the thing like, do you make it, if it's a horror, do you make it supernatural horror? Do you make it real horror, like in physical horror, in terms of vampires, werewolves, whatever?
Yeah, see, that's what I did find interesting too, and I was thinking about that when I was going through the list, because a lot of the ones that work are bent in sci-fi rather than more horror, right?
Yeah, right. Okay. Yeah. Like
when you try and do out and out horror, like like the what was the Exorcism one, and
the Last Exorcism.
The Devil Inside.
The Devil Inside. Yeah. The one with the girl.
they just don't work because that's out and out horror, right? And it just doesn't work. And I think it needs to have an element of, and this is where it's a fine line, because it needs to have an element of the fantastical and horror grounded in some sort of reality, so that as an audience we kind of are allowing ourselves to go into whatever the world is that's being told to us, and it not be too far-fetched at the same stretch, because as soon as it gets far-fetched, that equally jumps you straight out. And you go, well, that's not believable.
Yeah. And again, same thing. It's like the Rec. You and I are big fans of Rec. Rec 2, they actually go back in the building again. Yeah. But they follow a bunch of kids going to find out what's going on. And there's one bit where so some old lady gets the zombie virus, and she attacks the camera crew, and she attacks one of the kids. But the kid grabs her grandma, and he looks at the camera, looks at the grandma, looks at the camera, looks at the camera, and the way he looks backwards and forwards from the camera to the grandma is like, "Are you getting this? Are you getting this? Are you seeing how horrific this is? Are you seeing how scary this is?" It just takes you right out of it. It's just like, again, and it's just one small moment of action. It's just like, that's dumb. So it is, and I think too that's the thing, when you shoot one take. I'm a filmmaker. I shoot a lot of skits. The big trade-off is like, if I shoot 3 pages of dialogue in one take, then I can take care of it in one take. And people go, like Spielberg's like massive fan of Spielberg, who isn't. He does what's called the Spielberg One. An awful lot of his old films, from Indiana Jones to Jaws, there's a lot of single take shots that go on for like 2 minutes, 3 minutes, and it's all in one take. You don't realize what he does very cleverly, because he comes from old Hollywood, is the camera's always moving through the scene or across the scene, changing lenses from a 2-shot to a 1-shot. So it feels like it is motion, it is movement. That's all one take. And he can do that because he's got the best cameraman, he's got the best dolly grips, he's got the best lens pullers. He also has the world's best actors who can hit their mark, say their lines flawlessly without looking like they're hitting their mark. And that was the thing I found. Whenever I tried to do an extended single take in one shot, try and take care of pages of dialogue, I'm not working with the best actors in the world, and you're relying very heavily on, for me, if you want to be a perfectionist, you're relying on everybody just getting everything right. And it's like 1917, where they do 8-minute scenes, basically, strung together. Like, there's one scene where apparently one of the lead actors tripped and fell at the 7-minute mark, tripped over his rifle after going through the whole scene of battle and choreography, and he had to do it again, right? Yeah. But that's the sort of thing, like, that's what you're dealing with. So there's an attractiveness to doing single cam found footage where you can take care of pages of dialogue in one shot, but it just takes something to go wrong, and an actor not getting the line quite right, which means he doesn't get the information out correctly, something. It just comes across as, that's just shit. So it's hard. It's really it's tough. It's just one thing you trade off with, because when you have the ability to edit from shot to shot, you can change the rhythm of a scene, the energy of a scene. Taking a take from one, stitching takes from other bits, you can control the scene a lot better. But I don't know. I have more respect for the craft in terms of, I realize how hard it is to make. Having said that, the overwhelming majority of the 500 films of found footage that are out there, and I've not seen all 500, I could tell you without looking, will be shit. I've seen a few low-end found footage horror films. I went through a phase where I watched a lot of them, but I can't watch if in the first 2 minutes if it's going to be shit or not. Yeah. And you don't watch them, and usually they're shit because they fall into the big cliches: bad acting, bad writing, bad character motivation. Those are the 3 big ones. So I don't even get to the effects side of things or the scary side. Is it scary? I don't give a shit. If it's got those 3, if they tick those 3 boxes early on, it's shit. Don't watch it. And a lot of them are like that. Just annoying characters, annoying acting, and just dumb. And so, yeah.
I have a quick question before we're obviously we're going to need to bow out soon. But what? I mean, you chose found footage as our subject, right, for the podcast. Why did you choose it, and what is it that draws you back and keep watching that as a genre?
I think it is clever filmmaking. It's a clever way of making a cheap film that can be, if it's done really well, means it's very successful, and it's just clever. For me, like, it is there's a scene in Aliens when the Marines go into the fusion chamber to find the aliens. Each one has a camera mounted on their shoulder. It was as if somebody said, you know what would be kind of a cool film if somebody just strung the film footage of the camera-mounted cameras on their shoulders. And I was like, that's a fucking genius idea. And I think that's the cleverness of that hook got me into found footage. Like I've got a list of my favorite found footage films. Wreck is absolutely one of them because Wreck was, you and I were working on a TV show that girl was working on, very similar, a lifestyle entertainment TV show.
Right.
And what you're seeing in Wreck is the rushes, the camera footage of what she does, and how she acts and how she was directed. Like, I directed my talent the way I directed where she was directing herself. Like, it was our world. It was. Yes. I remember thinking, fuck, somebody took my life, made a feature film, a horror feature film, and made a bloody good one. And I was like, fuck. That was like, I felt so stupid because I'm like, that's a genius idea. And I could have made that film, but I didn't, obviously. But that's what I'm saying. It's like, it was our life. We made a TV show just like that. And I loved the cleverness of that. Like, it was really clever. And that's why I keep coming back to it. I think it's like, I thought Paranormal Activity worked for me. I thought it was a really good film. It's scary because I watched it at home, and it's about people being scared at home. I mean, I found my biggest flaw. I've talked about this in another podcast. The biggest flaw for me for that film was that couple never left that house, even though they were told leaving the house was pointless. You still leave the fucking house. But yeah, I just find it interesting. But I'm finding, now that we've reached its limitations, it now needs something clever to make you sit up and go, that's different. That's why I thought Unfriended was clever, the way it worked in terms of different internet pages. Yes, there were teenage cliches. Those kids were annoying as batshit. But at least it was trying something a bit different. And that's why I think that's it. It's just a different way of telling stories. And that's why I do like it. But as with anything, it gets saturated because it becomes popular. And straight away, there's just a lot of shit imitators out there. That hurts it because the majority of them are shit. But when you find a good film, like good found footage films, just like finding any good film, you think it's good. Yeah. That's why I'm a fan of it. So I respect it. I think it's harder to do, like writing soap operas. You might be dismissive of soaps, well, I am anyway. But I have worked on a soap, and I know it's harder to write than you think. Not you specifically, but people in general think. And it's the same thing with found footage. I think I think it's very easy to go, that's shit. But I do accept that if we were to give it a go, we would go, oh, okay, you know what, this is harder than I thought it would be. Yes. But it can be, just like with anything else. If it's done well, it's done well, man, and it's fucking good. I think the cleverness behind it makes me go, oh, that's really smart. Another thing, very quickly too, before you go, there's also split genres.
Yes.
Which Rec 4 was at. I like how Rec 4 was one set at a wedding. Starts off as found footage, and then halfway it just gives up and goes, fuck this, let's just become a normal film. And I think that's interesting if you can mix and match them. Maybe that might be a thing that, because I don't think too many films have done that. I think the Chernobyl Diaries started off as a found footage film in the first 3 minutes, and it literally goes into a live action film, and there's an obvious transition point when it does. And I think it did that mostly because it knew that found footage was being a bit tired at that point. And I kind of got the impression that film was originally pitched as a found footage film. But I don't know if that might be a way to give birth to the genre by mixing the two in a certain way. I don't know. Yeah. But yeah, look, it's certainly this is a podcast long time coming for a horror podcast to talk about found footage, because it is the genre de jeu of the 21st century. It is certainly has died down. I think it's gone quiet. Absolutely. But as to where it goes from here, I don't know. I don't know. I think, like, you see TV shows have like web series which can have a found footage component to it. And the TV show itself. So I guess that the good examples of that would be The Office and Parks and Rec. But we can go about that into another podcast if you like. But it's interesting. So look, I hope as a film genre it is here to stay. I hope there'll be more good ones that come out. I think it's probably going to go through a bit of a lull at the moment and be a trend, like slashers were a trend.
That's it.
Come back.
But
I think what's your favorite found footage film before we go?
Man, that's tricky because I really like Wreck as well. So I don't want to be copying you. I mentioned The Sacrament a fair bit. I really enjoyed that one. I just thought it was really well handled. Man Bites Dog I mentioned earlier. I thought was a really good version, and that was done, as I said, way back in the early 90s. So kind of like that one. We didn't mention Lake Mungo, which was an Australian one.
I really enjoyed Lake Mungo. Only because the payoff. I did. I really did. It was one of those films that it's a bit long and it has a bit of a misdirect after the first act where you think, oh, it's all fake, and then the payoff shot that makes the money shot, which makes you go, the big reveal worked. Like, because the build up to it was so long at that point, and you see the final bit that's the payoff of the thing works quite well. So I enjoyed it. Creep was another one I thought great example.
What about Creep?
Great example, yeah. Great acting.
The main thing in that is what won that. You know, he was so beautifully unhinged. And
he was perfect.
That energy that whole way through the movie. Otherwise, it would.
Great acting.
Yeah.
Great. Yeah. It hinged on him completely being a great actor, and because of that, he ended up getting Hollywood roles. He ended up nailing Olivia Wilde. He's married to her, right?
I don't know, mate. I don't follow the gossip stuff. I don't know. No idea.
I think he is. Or maybe not. Oh, maybe it's because he stars with him. I don't know. Anyway, he's done well. But he's a classy actor, man. He's like and it's two guys effectively.
Yeah, that's right.
But it really hinged on him being a creep. But you couldn't take his eyes off him. And it's a great example of great acting. Yeah, exactly. Great performance. Great character motivation.
Yeah. I think I think that was probably it for me. None of that was really. They're kind of.
I enjoyed Grave Encounters, the first one, because it was us on a ghost tour. Us on a ghost tour. If a ghost tour went really, really well, I enjoyed it. But the second one, The Tunnel, got to pay props to that. Not only because the filmmaker's a friend of ours, but he did it for his first film. It's a really good, fantastic effort.
Yeah. I agree.
And that's basically it. The worst ones, bad ones. There's so many bad ones. The Grave Encounters 2, Pyramid. Oh my God, you have to see The Pyramid. The Gallows is a good example of annoying kids.
Okay, but there's a sequel to that, you know.
Yeah.
What does that say?
Because annoying kids like annoying kids. I don't know. It's an MTV film. So what can I say?
Got me stumped.
Yeah, got me stumped as well, mate. But so that's it. So I hope you enjoyed our thoughts and our rambling thoughts and ideas on found footage horror. This is a long podcast incoming, so I really hope you enjoyed that, and I hope we'll get to do more about other genres and maybe other topics that we can think of, or you can think of. Mm-hmm. So send your messages to Saul. In the meantime, seriously, what is that? Can you hear that? Can you seriously hear that?
No.
I'm just gonna check that out. So I'm just gonna sign up. I'll be right back. Sorry, but you keep talking. So what?
So shit.
You're listening to the Surgeons of Horror podcast. Music supplied by Peter Nezik. For more discussions or podcasts, head over to surgeonsofhorror.com or head over to our Facebook and Twitter sites for the latest news and updates.